The ocean was silent, but death lurked beneath its dark surface. In the summer of 1944, deep in the Atlantic, a battered German U-boat broke through the waves, chased by relentless U.S. Navy destroyers. Explosions lit the night as depth charges tore through the deep, shattering steel and bone alike. The submarine crew, exhausted and defeated, surrendered, believing captivity was their salvation. But destiny had other plans. Amidst fog, fear, and frantic orders, 3 men were left stranded on their sinking vessel, forgotten by both friend and foe. What followed would become one of the most haunting survival stories of World War II, one that history tried to bury. Chapter 1. The Atlantic Graveyard. By 1944, the Atlantic Ocean had become a theater of ghosts. Hundreds of ships lay at the bottom, claimed by German U-boats that prowled the deep like wolves. Each convoy that left America's ports carried hope, food, weapons, and men. But many never made it across. The U.S. Navy had grown ruthless, deploying cutting-edge sonar, radar, and fast destroyers to crush Hitler's submarine fleet. Among the deadliest of these hunters was the USS Pope, a destroyer escorting a critical convoy bound for England. On a stormy night, they picked up the faint ping of a U-boat known as Wolf 32, infamous for sinking 12 Allied vessels in a single month. The chase began under a moonless sky, where silence was broken only by the pounding of waves and distant thunder. Each man aboard knew, if they failed, hundreds of lives would be lost. The Atlantic War was unlike any other. Beneath the calm surface lay a brutal cat-and-mouse game where seconds determined survival. Wolf 32's captain, Kapitänleutnant Ernst Moller, was a seasoned predator, but this time he had been hunted too long. With fuel running low, batteries drained, and enemy ships closing in, even he sensed his luck was running out. Chapter 2. The Relentless Chase. The USS Pope's sonar operator locked on. Target bearing 270, depth 90 meters. The destroyer roared forward, dropping depth charges in calculated bursts. The ocean erupted with fire and thunder, shaking the U-boat to its rivets. Inside Wolf 32, chaos reigned. Lights flickered, pipes burst, and men shouted over the screams of tearing metal. They had nowhere left to hide. After 6 hours of relentless pounding, Miller surfaced under a cloud of mist, white flag in hand. His crew stumbled out, coughing, drenched in oil and seawater. American sailors, tense but disciplined, lowered ropes and pulled them aboard. Under the Geneva Convention, these men were prisoners of war now, defeated, but alive. Or so they thought. Below deck, 3 sailors remained trapped, desperately retrieving coded documents and trying to scuttle the submarine before capture. Their captain never realized they had not surfaced. The USS Pope's crew, busy securing prisoners and navigating worsening fog, never checked below. In the chaos, the seeds of tragedy were sown. Chapter 3. Fog and Fractured Orders. That night, a heavy fog descended over the convoy, swallowing ships whole. Visibility dropped to mere meters, and radio communications became garbled whispers. A chilling message crackled over the USS Pope's comms. Luftwaffe aircraft were en route, hunting for the exposed fleet. Command ordered an immediate retreat. The destroyer's captain hesitated. Protocol dictated towing the damaged U-boat to base for intelligence, but the looming threat of air attack left no time. The U-boat was cut loose, left to drift silently in the fog. Unknown to all, 3 men were still aboard. As the destroyer vanished into the night, their desperate shouts were swallowed by the roar of the ocean. When silence returned, the sailors climbed out, expecting rescue, but found only endless water and the wreck beneath their feet. In one cruel twist of fate, they were neither prisoners nor free men. They were ghosts, stranded in a sea that had already claimed thousands. Chapter 4. Stranded in No Man's Ocean. The first night was the longest. Waves rocked the crippled U-boat, each creak of its hull a reminder of how close it was to sinking. Supplies were scarce, a single crate of hardtack, a few canteens of brackish water, and their dwindling hope. The three sailors, Hans, Otto, and Dieter, huddled together on the slippery deck, the weight of silence crushing them. Morning brought no salvation. The horizon stretched endlessly, and the USS Pope was gone. They tried repairing the radio, but seawater had fried its circuits. For the first time, the men realized they were truly alone. Survival instincts kicked in. They salvaged every scrap of food, every drop of fresh water, and rigged makeshift shelters from torn tarps and lifeboat debris. By the third day, hunger gnawed at their bodies. Otto suggested building a raft from the submarine's deck planks, but Dieter feared abandoning the only structure keeping them afloat. Arguments flared, exhaustion set in, and the line between comradeship and desperation began to blur. Chapter 5. The ocean turns hostile. On the fourth night, the ocean unleashed its fury. A violent storm ripped across the Atlantic, tossing the crippled U-boat like a toy in a bathtub. Waves taller than houses crashed against the hull, tearing away makeshift shelters and sweeping supplies into the abyss. The men lashed themselves to the railings, praying for dawn. When the storm finally broke, the submarine was barely afloat. Salt water had soaked their rations, leaving only a handful of moldy biscuits and one canteen of drinkable water. Hans, once the calmest among them, broke down in tears. Dieter clenched his fists and stared at the horizon, as if sheer willpower could summon rescue. But the ocean remained indifferent. No planes came, no ships appeared. Just an endless, merciless expanse where time slowed and hope eroded with each passing hour. Chapter 6. Hunger and Hallucinations. By the sixth day, hunger gnawed deeper than fear. The men's ribs pressed against their soaked uniforms, their faces pale under the relentless Atlantic sun. Otto tore tiny pieces of the remaining hardtack, dividing them carefully, but even crumbs couldn't silence the roaring emptiness inside. Dieter whispered about hunting seabirds, but the sky was empty, mocking their desperation. Hans began murmuring in his sleep, dreaming of warm kitchens and his mother's voice. Sometimes he woke screaming, convinced Allied planes hovered overhead. On the seventh morning, Otto swore he saw smoke on the horizon, waving his arms wildly. But nothing was there, only a cruel mirage, born from exhaustion and thirst. The men argued over the last drops of water, mistrust replacing camaraderie. "We ration, or we die," Dieter snapped, but Otto refused, gulping half a canteen in rage. By nightfall, silence settled among them, each man nursing his anger like a wound. The ocean, vast and indifferent, offered no answers, only the soft groans of a dying U-boat beneath their feet. When darkness fell, Hans whispered a prayer into the salty wind, his voice trembling. None of them knew who he prayed to, God, fate, or the unforgiving Atlantic itself. But the waves swallowed his words without reply, leaving only despair behind. Chapter 7. The Phantom Plane. On the ninth day, a distant hum cut through the silence. An aircraft. The three men stumbled onto the slick deck, shielding their eyes from the blinding sun. A small silhouette grew against the sky, wings glinting silver. Dieter grabbed a flare, his hands shaking, and fired a crimson burst into the heavens. The plane dipped, circling once, and hope surged through their veins like fire. Hans waved his uniform frantically. Otto screamed until his voice cracked, believing salvation was within reach. But after a brief inspection, the aircraft climbed higher and disappeared into the horizon, leaving only the echo of its engines behind. Otto collapsed to his knees, sobbing into his palms, while Dieter slammed his fist against the railing until his knuckles bled. Hans stared blankly at the fading contrail, whispering, "They saw us. Why didn't they stop?" No one answered. The silence carried more weight than words ever could. That night, their despair deepened. Lightning forked across the sky in the distance, and the smell of rain teased their parched lips. But the clouds drifted away, offering no relief. The Atlantic was cruel. It dangled hope like a mirage, only to snatch it away when it was needed most. Chapter 8. The Sharks Beneath. By the 11th day, another predator stalked them. Sharks. At dawn, Dieter noticed dark shadows circling beneath the waves, sleek bodies gliding silently around the crippled submarine. Hans leaned over the edge, staring at rows of glistening teeth cutting through the water like knives. Their hearts pounded as reality set in. The ocean wanted them, alive or dead. That afternoon, Otto slipped while refilling a canteen and nearly fell overboard. Hans grabbed his arm just in time, but not before a dorsal fin sliced the surface, inches from Otto's dangling boots. Panic erupted. No one dared lean too far now, and drawing water became an act of terror. At night, they heard splashes around the hull, fins brushing against metal as the predators circled endlessly. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of the submarine felt like a warning, every ripple of water a reminder that they were trapped between drowning above and dying below. By the 12th day, the men had stopped speaking. They sat back to back on the tilted deck, clutching makeshift spears crafted from broken pipes, their eyes scanning the water for any sudden movement. The sharks never left, patient and relentless, waiting for exhaustion or madness to claim their prey. On Chapter 9. Madness on the horizon. Isolation shattered their minds long before hunger claimed their strength. On the 13th day, Hans began laughing without reason, his voice sharp and brittle like cracked glass. He whispered that he could hear his fiancée calling from beneath the waves, her voice tangled with the groans of the sinking steel. Dieter tried to snap him out of it, but Otto's paranoia worsened. He accused Dieter of hiding food, insisting he'd seen him eating at night. Their shouting carried over the waves until exhaustion silenced them. The U-boat became a coffin of fractured trust, where fear devoured reason and hope bled away with each setting sun. By evening, Hans stood on the deck's edge, arms outstretched as though embracing the ocean's endless pull. Dieter dragged him back, his voice trembling as he pleaded, "We're going home. You hear me? We're going home." But the words sounded hollow, even to him. That night, thunder rolled across the horizon, but no rain followed. The skies remained bone dry, and the stars above mocked them with cold indifference. Far beneath, the sharks still circled. Above, clouds swallowed the moonlight. Around them stretched nothing but an infinite emptiness where hope came to die. Chapter 10. The Raft of Desperation. On the 15th day, their food was gone, and thirst burned their throats like fire. Dieter made the call none of them wanted to face. They had to abandon the U-boat. Using broken deck planks and lifeboat scraps, they built a crude raft under the blazing sun, their cracked hands blistering as they tied each piece together. Otto refused at first, terrified of leaving the only solid surface keeping them above the sharks. But the U-boat groaned louder with each passing tide, seawater flooding compartments they could not reach. Staying meant drowning. Leaving meant gambling with the ocean's fury. There were no good choices anymore. By dusk, they lowered the raft onto churning waters, their bodies trembling from exhaustion. One by one, they climbed aboard, pushing off from the submarine that had once been their fortress and now their tomb. The U-boat slipped into shadow as they drifted into uncharted waters, three silhouettes against an endless horizon. The first night on the raft was silent. No stars, no wind, just the slow, steady rocking of waves beneath them and the distant splash of something unseen. They didn't know where they were going, only that they couldn't stay where they had been. The Atlantic had become their judge, their executioner, and perhaps their last hope. Chapter 11. The Silent Savior. On the 17th day, hope returned in the form of distant engines. Dieter spotted a faint silver glint across the horizon, an Allied patrol plane cutting through the clouds. The men erupted, waving torn pieces of their uniforms, their cracked voices screaming for salvation. Otto lit their last flare, the crimson streak painting the sky like a desperate cry for life. The plane dipped lower, circling the raft, and for one breathtaking moment, rescue felt certain. The men clutched each other, trembling with relief, whispering prayers between broken breaths. But then the aircraft veered away, banking eastward and vanishing into the endless blue without dropping a single line or signal. Otto collapsed flat on his back, tears streaming silently as Dieter pounded the raft with raw fists, cursing the heavens. Hans sat motionless, staring at the horizon, his sunburned lips moving in silent prayer. They had been seen, they had been marked, yet they had been left. Nightfall brought crushing silence, the weight of abandonment sinking heavier than hunger or thirst. Above them, the stars glittered cold and sharp, while below, the restless sharks still circled, as if mocking the fragile thread of humanity clinging to the surface. Chapter 12. When Trust Fractures. By the 19th day, hunger and dehydration shattered what remained of their unity. Otto, delirious from sunstroke, accused Dieter of hoarding food they no longer had. He lunged at him with a broken spar, screaming incoherently, his cracked lips foaming with salt and rage. Dieter wrestled him down, pinning him until his energy collapsed into sobs. Hans watched them silently, his hollow eyes reflecting the madness growing between them. That night, he whispered about swimming toward lights beneath the waves, convinced rescue awaited in the deep. Dieter shook him violently, shouting that there was nothing down there but death. But Hans no longer believed him. Sleep came in ragged fragments, dreams twisting into nightmares of drowning and fire. They awoke screaming at invisible threats, their minds fraying as the boundary between reality and delirium dissolved into mist. By the 20th dawn, Dieter sat apart from the others, carving faint marks into the wood of the raft, counting days, counting breaths, counting regrets. Each wave slapped the boards beneath him, a reminder that time was running out and the ocean showed no mercy. Chapter 13. The Final Storm. The 21st night brought fury from the skies. Black clouds rolled over the Atlantic, swallowing the stars, while towering waves rose like mountains around the fragile raft. The wind howled like 1,000 demons, tearing at their clothes, dragging them toward the abyss. Rain lashed their faces, mixing with seawater that threatened to pull them under. Otto screamed as the raft split at one corner, clutching a broken spar as Dieter lashed ropes with trembling hands. Hans lay unmoving, too weak to help, whispering fragments of his mother's lullabies between gasps of cold air. Lightning flashed, blinding white across the heavens, revealing the endless, hungry mouth of the sea below. In one violent surge, a wave swallowed half the raft, ripping Hans into the dark waters. Dieter dove instinctively, but the ocean was merciless, pulling Hans into the black depths before anyone could reach him. His muffled scream vanished beneath the roar of the storm. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving a shattered raft adrift in silence. Two men remained, huddled together beneath the pale, merciless sun. Hans was gone, claimed by the ocean, his memory swallowed by salt and silence. Chapter 14. Shadows of Rescue. The 23rd day blurred into the 24th. Dieter and Otto lay sprawled across the ruined raft, their bodies skeletal, lips cracked beyond repair. The salt stung every open wound, and their skin burned beneath the relentless sun. Then, at midday, a sound cut through the stillness. Engines, deep and resonant, approaching fast. Dieter forced his swollen eyes open, catching sight of a distant silhouette. A U.S. Navy destroyer, its hull slicing through waves. For the first time in days, he felt the weight of tears. Otto tried to shout, but his voice was dust, his throat raw and useless. Dieter waved a broken spar, but his arm trembled violently, barely rising above the deck. For agonizing minutes, the ship loomed closer, and salvation seemed just within reach. But as they waited, no one on deck noticed them. The destroyer turned sharply, adjusting course, and sailed into the horizon. The sound of its engines faded until nothing remained but silence, and the crushing realization that the ocean wasn't finished testing them. Chapter 15. Shadows of the Past. On the 26th day, salvation finally came. Another Allied patrol spotted the wreckage and alerted a rescue vessel. A small cutter approached cautiously, scanning for survivors. Dieter opened his eyes at the sound, his breath shallow and rasping. Strong hands lifted their frail bodies aboard, wrapping them in blankets as medics scrambled. Dieter gazed back one final time at the shattered raft, now adrift without purpose, and the gray line of the horizon beyond. Weeks later, debriefings revealed the truth. Miscommunication, fog, and chaos had left 3 men stranded, forgotten in a war too vast to care about them. Their survival was a miracle, but their story was buried beneath mountains of classified files for decades. Years later, Dieter would stand by the Atlantic, older and grayer, staring into the same restless waters. He said nothing, but his silence carried everything. The screams, the storms, the despair, and the haunting emptiness of being left behind. History often glorifies battles, victories, and heroes, but it forgets the ghosts. The story of the Wolf 32 crew is not just about survival. It's about what happens when humanity collides with the chaos of war. 3 men were stranded between life and death, friend and foe, hope and despair. 2 survived, but neither truly escaped the Atlantic. War writes its legends in blood, but the ocean writes its own, in silence. And sometimes, the silence says more than history ever could.